So I hope everybody is doing okay tonight with the Ānāpānasati Sutta, Mindfulness of Breath. And I'm just going to highlight a bit of the remaining sections, talk a bit about what's going on here, and then if we have any discussion or questions, it'd be good for us to look at them. So this sutra we've been reading, which gives some very direct instructions on meditation and really what mindfulness is. And the type of mindfulness that always starts with the breath as a type of object to concentrate our attention upon. Because whenever we're talking about concentration, we need it to have a point of focus. And that's what the breath serves as here. But we see that it expands beyond the breath while keeping the breath in mind. Because the breath is happening in this moment. And the mindfulness is this open and non-judgmental awareness of our moment, of our present moment, in a way that is always making a wise decision as to where we want to place our attention. And noticing when our attention has strayed from that object, and training the mind to recognize that, distractedness, and coming back to the object we chose. Again, without judgment. It's not that the thoughts that we started to become involved with were bad in any way, but they just weren't the point of our practice at this time. When it's time to think about those thoughts, that's what you should be doing. And your mindfulness training will help you when you have to think of those thoughts to recognize that if that's your point of concentration and you start wandering to something else, then you come back to those thoughts that you want to be with. It can be at work, it can be in a conversation, it can be any time where you're wanting to be focused on something and you find your mind drifting to something else. Your mindfulness practice allows you to recognize that you have drifted and to make the choice to come back to your object of, of purpose. And the purpose in our meditation is not to get lost in our thoughts, but rather to train ourselves to remain with the body and breath and whatever else phenomena comes into our experience without attachment. So we see that this meditation practice as a training will help us remain more alert and aware in situations outside of, sitting meditation. Now, in the first sections that we read, which was mainly about the first section where the Buddha was introducing it as a very beneficial practice that bears fruit. And then we went into the actual description of the mindfulness of breathing itself, mindfulness of in and out breathing. And we went through that section. And the instructions are repeated as a type of oral tradition that makes it easier to remember. And then we got to this third section, which is called the 4 frames of reference, which in another way of calling it is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And those 4 frames or reference or 4 foundations of mindfulness have to do with the mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, of what's going on in your thoughts and mind and will, and then mindfulness of different qualities of mind and different insights that the mind has. So those are what are called the 4 foundations or 4 frames of reference or of mindfulness. And the Buddha in another sutra, another teaching, develops those 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the 4 foundations of mindfulness sutra. The Satipatthana Sutra, foundation of mindfulness, goes over them in a much longer and much more detailed way of what mindfulness of body is, and mindfulness of feelings, and mind objects or qualities. And so this kind of gives us an very summary and short form of that in relation to the breath. But to go deeply into breathing meditation is to go deeply into mindfulness of these other aspects of what a self is and what a life is right now. So what we're becoming aware of and mindful of is how we live in this moment. And how we live in this moment includes our breath, and mindfulness of our body, and the breath in the body. And what's called the body fabrication, or how the body is put together. And in the Buddhist teaching, they're taught that the breath is really a foundation of the body. Without the breath, the body is going to fall apart. Meaning, which is an interesting way of thinking about it. So body fabrication is to make something. And the Buddha teaches that the breath really makes up the body. And it's a kind of a simple, almost biological explanation, because when there's no breath, then, pretty soon in relatively short amount of time, there won't be any body. So the breath is something that really does keep everything together. You can go without food and water for a while, but without breath for more than 3 minutes, then, your body is going to start coming apart pretty soon. So we start to become aware of the essential nature of breath as it, really keeps this body going, and how fundamental it is. So I want to read a bit with you about the 4 frames of reference and the foundations of mindfulness, and then just almost list the last part of the sutra, which is the 7 factors of awakening. So in this relatively short teaching and sutra, we really, what we say is it packs a punch, meaning it really does deliver a lot of depth and incredible encouragement to this really straightforward practice. And straightforward doesn't mean easy, because being aware in the present again and again of our lives is very challenging when what we're experiencing is not necessarily pleasant. So in the mindfulness of body, and as the Buddha says, and I'm just reading it here, how is mindfulness of in and out breathing developed and pursued to bring the 4 frames of reference. So how do we breathe in and out so that we can become aware of other parts of our lives right now? So we want the intention of mindfulness of breathing is that we understand that to be aware of your breath is also to be aware of the rest of your life. And some people get a bit frustrated with the breath, thinking, oh, it's such a simple thing. When do I go beyond the breath? You know, how long do I have to keep watching the breath? People ask that, and often when you start in Zen training, the first thing people are taught to do is to actually count the breaths from 1 to 10. And it seems really so elementary that after a while, okay, I'm bored, I got this. When do I stop counting the breath? And if we appreciate this teaching of the Mindfulness of Breath Sutra, we see that we're never done to the breath. We start to see just how expansive the breath is. And the breath is not just about the physical breath in the body, but it is the seat or perspective or it's the moment with which I see everything else. The breath is my moment. No breath, no moment. So let's take a little look at this for a second. I'll read just the first mindfulness of breath, of body, because then what's repeated in the other 3 mindfulness of feeling and mind qualities is the same formula. As I said, the same formula and the same almost syntax and sentences are used. So let me just say here, on whatever occasion a monk breathing in long discerns, or is aware of, I am breathing in long, or breathing out long discerns, I am breathing out long, or breathing in short discerns, I am breathing in short, or breathing out short discerns, I am breathing out short, trains himself. I will breathe in and out, sensitive to the entire body, trains himself. I will breathe in and out, calming body fabrication. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on the body, in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful. Ardent is you're putting a lot of motivation and emphasis in this. Like you're putting energy into it. You really want to do this practice. Alert, you're awake and mindful, present. Putting aside greed and distress, attachment and aversion, that's greed and distress, with reference to the world. Okay? So to sit in meditation is to take a short retreat, because you're letting go of the attachment we have, the greed and distress, attachment and aversion, to the outside world, because I want to focus on what's happening now in my body. And that's the first stage of mindfulness of body. I tell you, monks, that the in and out breath, is classified as a body among bodies, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. Okay, so as we see, there's an interesting phrase here where the Buddha says, I tell you that the breath is a body among bodies. And when it's mentioned body fabrication, the explanation for that is just simply the breath that's going in and out. I'm aware of my body. I'm aware of my breath. I'm aware of how my breath is, connected and deeply connected in a way that is inseparable from body. That there's no breath without body and there's no body without breath. So I'm seeing this unity here, and I'm seeing it through the awareness of the breath. So the breath is the way that we can become aware and find some sense of ease and calm, alert, being awake, being ardent, like really looking with energy, and being present. That's the mindfulness of body and breath. Many of us have difficulty with our bodies at different times. We may have pain, and we may have pleasure. We may have, age issues. We may have illness. We may have fatigue. We may have different experiences of the body. We may have things we like and things we dislike, either in our health, in our appearance, or just in our sense of identity with our body. There's many issues people have, body issues of having to do with gender, having to do with our race, all these body issues that have to do with body. And then when we're breathing and we're breathing with our body and aware of our body as body, that there is skin and there are eyebrows and there are teeth and there are your ears and there are shoulders and there is your chest and your stomach. And when you're breathing body, the entire body, we're aware of the whole thing without greed or distress, as you said, meaning without attachment or aversion. There are things I like about my body, things I don't like about my body. But when I'm mindful, alert, aware of it through the practice of breath, that breath and body then are one. To be aware of the breath is to be aware of the body. And that breath is a place that does not have, judgment. And that breath is a place that, it is as it is, the body of the body. The breath, in the sense, is the body of the body. And so we're breathing it, and by accepting the breath, we're accepting the body as it is. And as we age, for those of us who are aging, which is probably all of us, the body changes. As you grow up from childhood, the body changes. And as you grow into older age, the body is changing. And those changes are like the changes of the breath. When there's a long breath, I discern long breath. And when there's a short breath, I discern short breath. And so too, when there's pain in the back, I discern pain in the back. And when there is hunger, I discern hunger. And when there is fatigue, I discern fatigue. Okay? When there's gray hair, I discern gray hair. When there's, loose teeth, I discern loose teeth. Inside, there's body awareness also, whether you can be very quiet and hear or feel your heart beating, whether you feel your stomach before eating, after eating, different organs that may, you may become aware of. Itchiness, coolness, heat. The body has many sensations and many aspects, inside and out, that can be part of our breath awareness. Body is body. Body is body. It is what it is. And that's body is body. And the breath is the breath. So we breathe with the breath and we breathe with the body at the same time. And that's mindfulness of body. Now in the Satipatthana Sutra, which is a much longer, like 4 pages of describing body as body. This is the real short version of it. So it's nice, it's useful. But when the Buddha teaches mindfulness of body, body is body, it goes beyond the breath and beyond just this description of the body in its entirety. And it goes into all the things like, bones and sinews and navel and blood and gums and saliva and mucus and urine and stool and all the parts of the body that may cause aversion to us, and all things that may cause us to have such attraction and attachment. And the body is dead, the body is decaying, the body is dust, the body is bones. all the aspects, all the cycle of the body is part of the body awareness. But if you're interested in that, the longer version, then you should look at the Satipatthana Sutra, which is definitely a very excellent also meditation guide. So then we move on from breath as body to breath as feelings. And this is also on the next section where he says, I will breathe in and out, sensitive to mental fabrication. I'll breathe in and out, calming mental fabrication. On the occasion, the monk remains focused on feelings in and of themselves, ardent, alert, mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. I will tell you, monks, that the careful attention to the in and out breaths, again, we're repeating always this careful attention to the in and out breaths. But the breath includes then body, and here it's including feelings as well. Feelings that come from our mental fabrication. Mental fabrication, our mind is always creating things. It's creating things. It's creating stories. It's creating reactions. It's creating perspective. It's creating point of view. And from that point of view of me is aroused certain feelings. And when the Buddha here in the, when we're talking about mindfulness of feelings, what it specifically means is whether it's feelings of pain, pleasure, or indifferent, that there's sort of this like and dislike or neutral, that type of feeling towards the pain and or the pleasure. There's like and dislike and neutral. And that's a natural reaction that the mental fabrications are making things up. So I'm making up these relationships. There's nothing inherent in the relationship between my mind and my experience that will make me like it or dislike it. That's my mental fabrication. And in the mindfulness of breath, you're noticing how your mind is making this up. It's making up this relationship of like and dislike, or like neutral. So for some people, if a car honks, they don't register anything and it's neutral. For someone else, it's aversion. For someone else, it's their friend coming to pick them up and it's attachment, they like it. So the same single phenomena or event in three different people will have three different mental fabrications, creations, a way of relating to it. And that's the mindfulness of feeling, is you're noticing your mind creating these relationships of like, dislike, or indifferent, or neutral. And that's happening within the close attention to the breath. So you're being aware of the breath, and you're noticing from that calm, still, concentrated place, your mind is doing this, creating these responses to your experience. Like, dislike, don't care. Okay. And it's in relation to what we experience, our perception of pain or pleasure, or neutral. Pain, pleasure, neutral, like, dislike, don't care. And mindfulness of breath, in this second section of the four foundations, the four frames, the second frame then is noticing that happening in your mind. We've gone from body to mind, and then the rest of the work is all in mind, of noticing what's going on in the mind, and how the mind is making up a lot of relationships and stories, even as you sit noticing the breath. Now, now the rest of the that's sort of the structure of what's happening here, is that now that we've entered looking at mind and looking at how the mind is creating these relationships to the world and our experience, and how you kind of are owning it by looking at it and seeing that your mind is producing this, and you're able to look at it a little more clearly because your breath gives you sort of a stable place from which to look at it. So you're creating a stability, a mental stability, and mindful stability by remaining securely connected to the mindfulness of breath. So it's always through the in and out breath. I discern through the in breath this mental fabrication, discern through the out breath mental fabrication, meaning I'm just noticing the aversion and attachment, the like and dislike that's going on in my mind. It may not be happening all the time that you're always swinging back and forth. You may just kind of be in a peaceful place. Yeah. But there may be also some attachment to that peace that you're experiencing. You know? So like, I like it. So you have peace, and then there's a sort of, or calm, and you're settled. And then you become a little self-conscious of it, and you sort of go, yeah, this is a good place to be. You know, I'm in a deep meditation. I'm really mindful of my breath. And then you kind of enjoy that. So there's a bit of attachment there. And you notice that in relation to your meditation states, you may have some mental fabrication. You may have some attachment or aversion. So you may feel a bit restless or a bit bored. And then you notice that there's some aversion to the boredom or the restlessness that you feel in meditation. You may notice some mental judgment coming up towards yourself or others, you know, during meditation. And that creates some stress. Remember, the way that one of the ways we define dukkha is stress. There's a feeling of a sense of tension that you lost your peace there because your mind started making stories again and going into your sense of self, like, you know, this isn't doing anything, or I hope this stays, or, you know, judging your experience in some way. And that's an area of mental fabrication. But you're making up stuff. Yeah. It's normal. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, that's how we live a life of the self, is we live it according to the stories we create. And these stories we've been invested in for a long time, you know, so we're very attached to them. And we don't even notice that it's really coming from me and my interpretation of this experience that is causing me to judge it as like nothing's happening, or I'm bored. And, you know, you could be you describe a meditation retreat to somebody and staying in a room or in a place in a lonely, isolated area, or let's say in your own room, doing nothing and not being on screens or anything like that. Somebody who's not involved in the meditation would probably respond with a sense of wonder at how could you not be terribly bored. You know, it sounds pretty boring. And boredom is something that meditation practitioners usually experience and struggle with at different points. And it may not actually be experienced as boredom, but it may be experienced as the mind always reaching out for other things and restless and needing to think a lot, you know, because you can't just be with the quiet and with the non-activity. In that sense, the simplicity of being with the in and out breath, discerning the mind, discerning the body, you know, and the settling so that it's not always fabricating or making up thoughts and stories that will give us something to do, because it's hard to accept the not doing, but rather the being. But when you can, then the real interest that arises when mindfulness is practiced well makes boredom an impossibility. What boredom can there be when looking deeply at the life as it is? And if I'm bored, or if I'm restless, or if I'm distracted, it's because I'm not really looking. You know, so to look closely at breath. That's why he said ardent, alert, okay, and mindful. You have to keep reminding yourself that this practice is important, that you need to put energy in it. You can't just drift. When you just drift in meditation, it leads to dullness or daydreaming. Okay, and part of the 5 hindrances there that the Buddha wrote about of ill will, we're not usually angry and wishing people bad in meditation, but we may feel dull and sluggish and not very alert. Right? And for that, we need to put a little more energy into it. And we may feel restless or some worry or anxiety or fear. You know? And that's something that we need to notice as a technique to try to understand that it's a natural response to not doing. Our days are filled with doing, and the natural response of the mind to not doing is to try to fill that space with mental activity. Through much practice, you can accept that you don't need a lot to be interested. You really don't need a lot to discover a lot. That there's a lot right where we look. These mental states, these mental fabrications that we're noticing in our breath awareness and the other frames of mindfulness. There is the mindfulness of body. There is a mindfulness of feelings, as I said with the second frame of mindfulness, mental fabrications. And then there's mindfulness of mind and mind tones. And those mind tones, apart from feeling pain and pleasure, which is a different type of feeling, here the mind tones are when you're having strong emotional reactions. They can be rapture, it can be joy, it can be depression, it can be sadness. It can be a lot of the emotions that we may experience and a lot of the thoughts that are included in them. So that's the mindfulness of mind, is having all the more developed sense of self, more developed, that arises out of this sense of pleasure, pain, aversion, attachment. And then we have more developed emotions and thoughts that come up. This mindfulness of mind is that there's a lot of activity going on, and yet we include that in the breath. So here's the third frame of mindfulness, frame of reference or foundation of mindfulness. There's body, there's feelings, there's mental activity, which has to do with emotions and volition and desires. Desire for, desire not for. The whole rich emotional life we have, the whole rich mental life, very rich and fascinating and troubling and disturbing and interesting, all that. We don't deny it, and we don't try to even quiet it. We let it be by observing it with the mindfulness. Breathing in long, I discern. I'm breathing in long, and I'm aware of mind, what's going on in mind. Breathing out, I'm aware of what's going on in my mind. And the breath allows that to be one of the objects of my mindfulness. Here's the thing, is that this frame of mindfulness is saying that even all the mental activity is not a distraction. It can be an object of my mindfulness. Just as the aversions and attachments I may have, and the pain and pleasure and the mind, they are not in themselves distractions, but they can be objects of my awareness, which I accept in this breath. The breath allows me to maintain my stability, my mindful stability, so that I am centered and focused. And again, alert and with awareness and energy. So finally, then there's the final frame of mindfulness that is talked about here. Is where we go over different deep and deeper insights into, especially the insight of impermanence that we read at the end of last week, and it's repeated again here, that there's a certain nature of the mind that is understood here. So I'll just read again where it says, on whatever occasion a monk trains himself, I'll breathe in and out, focusing on impermanence and constancy. Trains himself, I'll breathe in and out, focusing on dispassion, non-attachment. Trains himself, I will breathe in and out, focusing on cessation, I see it and the phenomena. Trains himself, I'll breathe in and out, focusing on relinquishment, I let go of it. On that occasion, the monk remains focused on the mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. He who sees with discernment the abandoning of greed and distress, attachment and aversion, is one who watches carefully with equanimity, which is why the monk on that occasion remains focused on mental qualities in and of themselves, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. So what are these mental qualities? So the first mindfulness frame of reference is mindfulness of body in its entirety with the breath. And then we have mindfulness of feelings, of attachment, aversion, neutrality, pain and pleasure. And when we have mindfulness of the mind in and of itself, the mental activities have to do with will and desire and with emotions. And here we have mental qualities in and of themselves. And what we see of these mental qualities is that the mental qualities, we're noticing that the qualities of the mind, that the nature of the mind is of inconstancy. We see the impermanence. We understand that these qualities of the mind, whether they are, beneficial or harmful, whether they seem like an obstacle to us, or whether they seem, like a strength, that all of these mental qualities we may have, whether we consider ourselves intelligent or dull, whether we foolish, whether we consider ourselves quick or slow, all these mental qualities we may have, and many more, any mental quality that may arise, and even the temporary ones, like I might feel a mental quality of having right now confusion, or I might have understanding. I might have a mental quality of curiosity, or I might just be disinterested. And these qualities and attitudes that arise, that we often consider part of our moment and as well as part of our personality. The nature of all these qualities of mind, including ones that may seem very spiritual to us, like having some bliss or having some sense of, deep insight, some awakening. We see them as we see all things, with the nature of the world, the nature of existence, that they are impermanent, that they don't make a self, because they arise and they pass, and that my attachment to them causes me stress, that they have the nature of suffering if they're attached to, or if they are pushed away. Without greed or distress, if there's greed or distress, if there's attachment to my mental qualities or aversion to them, that causes dukkha. But the mental qualities in themselves don't cause dukkha. It's my distress, my aversion, or my greed, or my attachment. And how I can avoid that aversion and attachment by deeply seeing, again, with my breath awareness, deeply seeing the inconstancy, the impermanence, deeply seeing with my own mental qualities. You know, there are days I'm like this, there are moments I'm like this. What I was a moment ago has changed and passed. The nature of my mind and nature of my sense of self is in a state of flux. That it arises, it changes, and it ends. And in that ending and passing, I have one option, and that's to let go. Of course I can hold on, but then I'm not, what am I holding on to? What am I holding on to? Something that's already passed. So that's the final frame of mindfulness, of these 4 frames of mindfulness that are taught here in relation to the breath. And I'm really emphasizing the fact that they are, you know, the whole point of this Ānāpānasati is to maintain awareness of breath while we are being aware of body, of feelings, of mind, and of mental qualities that are all, moving, changing, and ending as we observe, just like each breath. When we do this, and we do this practice, ardently, with strong motivation, when we do it alert, by keeping focused, and when we do it mindfully and practicing our present mind acceptance, and we do this practice regularly, then this sutra ends with a description and a mentioning of what's called the 7 factors of awakening. I'm not going to read this or even really go into them at all, but I'm just saying the reason it's here at the end of this sutra is as we have this whole continuous practice: breath, body, mind, states of mind, deep awareness, awakening. And the 7 factors of awakening are a continuation of this practice. It's showing us where it leads to. And that something as simple as the breath that deepens and deepens and, progresses to deep insight into the nature of self. And that clarity of seeing through the self and being able to relinquish totally, meaning to really let go. And by letting go, you're letting in and you're letting be. That deep acceptance then leads to these factors of awakening. And I will just simply mention them now. There is a factor of mindfulness. That's the first factor of awakening that this whole thing is about. There's a factor of discernment, which is understanding and analyzing experience to see its impermanence and constancy, to see its cessation, to understand the disadvantages of attachment. So understanding that when we're distracted by something, if we analyze it and we see like where is it going to lead to, suffering. So that's an important analysis. That's the second factor of awakening. There's persistence, which is the third factor of awakening. So we keep going, that's the being ardent and, you know, putting some motivation into your practice and energy. So there's mindfulness. There's discernment or analysis, understanding. There is persistence. You keep going. When the going gets tough, the tough keeps sitting. There's rapture. Rapture means that, yes, this experience, when you deepen your practice, there is contentment and joy that arises. The joy of being without needing anything. When you don't need anything, that's a happy place. Okay? And that's called the end of desire. When you end desire, it's not like just dull. Okay? It's happy. The end of desire is a happy place. And you end it a little, you'll get a little bit of happiness. You end it a lot, you'll get a lot of happiness. You end it completely, you'll be completely happy. Mm-hmm. And by being able to be completely happy and by letting go of desire, then there is a great peace. That's the fifth factor of awakening, which is called serenity or tranquility. So there's rapture and joy, but that joy is a peaceful place. You're content. The sixth one is concentration. Sixth factor of awakening is concentration. Having a strong focus on your practice. And finally, the seventh factor of awakening. These are not, sequential. They're developed all together. There's the seventh factor of awakening is equanimity. And that is also that sense of relinquishment or letting go that we see in this, that's been expressed a few times in that cycle of seeing the impermanence of things, seeing the cessation of things, and then letting go because they've ended. So there's nothing to hold on to. So equanimity is that sense of, I'm okay with that cycle of life. I'm okay with that. Yeah. So those seven factors of awakening are developed in tandem and as an inseparable part of mindfulness of breath. Mindfulness of breath expands to include body, feelings, mind, and mental qualities. The seven factors of awakening, these wonderful qualities, then are sprouts that start to grow as this practice is developed. So that's the sutra. What we do with it is up to us. The Buddha gave a wonderful instruction, which included not only in the beginning a kind of motivational kind of talk about it, but clear instructions that were practical. And then it's widening to show us just how it includes all of what it means to be alive at this moment, in terms of the four frames of mindfulness. And the last section, which is indicating what type of qualities the awakened mind develops and opens to, that are naturally part of you, and through this simple and very clear practice start to flower. Yeah, what I want to end us with before we open to any questions is this is not a text to be read, it's a text to be practiced. So we read it, we read some of it, not all of it, but I recommend this as a bit of a beginning. It's our last session reading it together and talking about it together. But I do recommend that you continue with it in your own way and take different sections and perhaps just try to, sit with that, see how it inspires and kind of enters your heart. So now to finish the last few minutes, and before we sit for a minute quietly, I would like to ask if anybody has a comment or question related to this practice or your own practice. It's a good time now to share if you wish.
Hello, Daniel. Actually, I have a question that might be connected to the sutta in an indirect way, but it's mostly connected to something you said last week. And correct me if I'm inaccurate. You said that meditation without intention is relaxation, and meditation with intention is liberation. That's right. So it was a strong moment for me to hear this sentence, and I've been thinking with that all week, and I still do, and I will. But instead of me asking a specific question about it, I thought maybe you could break down a little bit the connection between intention and liberation, because it's not obvious for me.
Okay, sure, that's good. It's an important point. Much of mindfulness in the West and taken outside of Buddhist context is taught as a sort of self-help and personal practice of becoming sort of calmer, more focused, and perhaps even more productive in your own life. But it's got a sort of a personal direction. This is going to sound odd, but Buddhism and the Dharma is not personal. It's just not, because it's not about you. You're the problem. But so am I. Meaning the attachment to self that we have is a problem. So if our mindfulness practice is making us have a better sense of self, like a mindful self, then it's just reinforcing that problem that we're very attached to our own story. Let me here is to help ourselves and others to let go of my stress. As a technique of stress reduction, it will be useful, but it's a dead-end street. Okay, it'll lead to the end of that street and that's it. But you need to keep traveling. And so the intention here of bodhicitta, the bodhisattva, okay, is a being who takes a vow to help all others because we're intimately connected to them. So the real liberation is the liberation from a small sense of self and the opening to a much more connected sense to the rest of the world. This is the idea. And so when I'm mindful, I'm not just entering into my thoughts of who I am and what I am, but I'm focusing on my moment, which is about what's happening in this my life in this moment. The sounds, the sensations, the feelings, the taste of, the food I'm eating, whatever it is, but it's not just lost in my own story. When I see my mind just working and, creating these attachments and aversions because of what I like and what I don't like, because of me. That's why I say I'm the problem. Because my sense of self creates a lot of walls. And mindfulness is just accepting things as they are without creating a whole story and narrative around it. It is what it is. And I accept this in this moment. So it's liberating from a very narrow perspective of my life. And why? Because I'm doing this practice in order to suffer less and help others suffer less. This is the liberating aspect of it. It's not about just my life. It's about all life. I start with my breath, but just as I see in this Ānāpānasati Sutta, that focusing on my breath then includes body and mind. My mind is about how I relate to the world. It's about my aversions and attachments to all the things outside of me. And when I can just sort of let them pass, then I'm no longer relating to the rest of the world in such a, struggle of want, not want. This is what mindfulness helps me become liberated from, is that struggle. That I want the world to go my way, and I don't want it not to go my way. That there's no end to that struggle. Mindfulness allows me to focus on how the present is, accept it as it is. And it's an interesting place to be. So the intention is that this practice is for all people. And I'm doing it to find my place in the world. And not just in myself. I'm doing mindful meditation to be part of the world. Does that make any sense?
Yes. I will have to listen to it again and again to remind myself, or just practice more. But definitely, yes. Yes. Thank you.
We see in the final sentences of this sutra that the seventh factor of awakening is equanimity. And equanimity is that open acceptance of life as it is, not as I want it to be. With that sense of acceptance of life, what life am I talking about? The life of myself and others. And so by practicing in a way that that quality and that approach, equanimity as an approach to life, opens. Means that I am becoming more free from the difficult places of the struggle, the aversion and the attachments. Freedom in the Dharma is not only the freedom to do what I want. It's the freedom from the prison. The prison of a small self, which makes our lives feel pretty narrow and often miserable, or great and egotistical. But that's another form of suffering. The suffering of the small self. And we're free to explore a greater sense of self that includes others as part of my body, as part of my world, as part of my mind, as part of my breath. So when we realize that we're doing this practice for all others, then when it's not going so great for me, that's less important, because it's not all about me. And that's a relief. So let us spend a minute now to sit together quietly. And to end with a dedication for this evening and our study of the sutra over these past few sessions. So we want to dedicate our practice to the well-being and the benefit of ourselves and all others. We may help to reduce suffering around us and within us, and to increase happiness. All beings in this world may be happy, and may all beings be free of all the forms of suffering they experience. And may all beings live in peace and without fear.